which is set partly in Ceylon, and that contains the books The Dust That Falls from Dreams, So Much Life Left Over, and The Autumn of the Ace. Can you tell us who inspired the character of Daniel Pitt?
Yes. My father's father had been in the Indian Army. He was on the northwest frontier trying to keep the Afghans under control. And when the First World War broke out, he deserted the Indian Army and went home and joined the Royal Flying Corps. I mean, just in time not to get done for deserting. So he deserted and rejoined. And he became a photographer and machine gunner in reconnaissance aircraft. My mother's father, on the other hand, was a fighter pilot. He was flying Sopwith Camels. So I sort of had aviation in the blood. I used to make those little plastic model airplanes, things like Sopwith Camels. And anyway, after the war was over, my father's father married my grandmother. And unfortunately, her fiancé had been killed in 1915. He only lasted a few weeks. He was killed in February of 1915 with a shrapnel in his stomach. And none of us think that she ever really recovered from it. And for that reason, her marriage didn't really stand a chance. And as the years went by, my grandfather spent more and more time away until he finally disappeared altogether and didn't turn up until he was 96, when he was found dead in the Canadian Rockies. He'd been living in a little green shed and was the night watchman at a quarry which was owned by the Similkameen Indians. I mean, it sounds a pretty exotic life he had, and he was an absolutely fanatical motorcyclist. He motorcycled all around Ceylon, as it then was, with a motorcycle and sidecar in the early 1920s. But anyway, he and my grandmother came here to start a new life. They were rubber planters. And they didn't last very long here because he was a bad employee. He always thought he knew better than his bosses. He got moved from one job to another until finally he had to go home. And my grandmother had a miscarriage and she was quite ill, so that was another reason to go home. But I think the real reason I got fascinated by Ceylon was because my mother was here in the Second World War. She was in the British Navy, in the Wrens. She was stationed at Trincomalee, and she was a signals officer controlling submarines in the Indian Ocean. This meant staying up all night, chain smoking, really. But she always she loved telling us stories about what it was like here and how beautiful and lovely it had been. She even wrote a short romance set at Mount Lavinia. Very Mills and Boone-ish. And I remember her delight when suddenly, in about 1965, we suddenly had avocados in the shops in the UK. And she used to make us a curry, which I think she must have learned how to make when she was here, although I'm not sure it was very authentic. It was made with Madras curry powder. It had lots of sultanas or raisins in it. It had lots of sliced banana, a big splashes of mango chutney, and it was covered with desiccated coconut. And I still make it for my children. It's called Grandma's South Indian curry, but my kids don't like it very much, to be honest. But I do.
And I know that you had a very lovely story about the houseboy who was very fond of your mother.
Yes, my mother had a houseboy, and they wrote to each other for years and years. I remember his letters still arriving in the 1960s. But she fell ill with dengue fever. She was in bed for a long time recovering from dengue, and her houseboy wasn't actually living in the house with her. And he was very worried about her possessions being stolen. So he nailed her cupboard doors shut and he nailed her drawers shut so that nobody could steal anything. And of course, when my mother got better, she needed to get into her cupboard and drawers. And that was when the problem started. I think they had to pretty much destroy it all to get to her clothes, yeah.
And Louis, in terms of your new book,
Oh, yes.
your latest novel is Light Over Lisgard, set in the near future and deals with the highly topical issue of our over-reliance on smart technology and dependence on the grid. Can you tell us about this novel, please?
That began in two ways, independently. One was, after my father died, I was I was looking through all the old photographs, and I found a photograph of the Effingham House goalball team from 1908. And it was my grandmother's photograph, and she had written the names of the girls under them. And in the bottom right-hand corner, and there's a picture of her at the back of the book, there's a girl called Maidie Knox Lilliter. She has long black hair down one side of her head. And when I saw this picture, I was sort of captivated by her, rather haunted by her. And she looked like the sort of girl I would have loved to have married, you know. And I thought, what a shame that the ideal woman died decades ago. So I thought, I know what, I'm going to bring her back to life. I'm going to put her in a novel. And she's actually in this novel as 3 separate characters, which I might get round to explaining. The other thing is, I was reading an article in The Week magazine, and it was what the scientists are saying. And the article was about quantum cryptography. I don't know if you've heard about this, but I'm personally much more worried about it than I am about artificial intelligence that we were talking about yesterday. Normal computers, they work by switching on and off, boom, 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 very, very, very rapidly. They're simply on-off. But quantum computers work on the principles of quantum mechanics, which is the subatomic level. And on the subatomic level, something can be in different states at the same time. So a wave can also be a particle, depending on how you observe it. For example, this is called superposition. Superposition, right? You might hear this word in the future. What it means is that with a quantum computer, the switches are on and off at the same time. Now, I know that's ridiculous and incomprehensible, but that's apparently the case. And if it's that fast, it means that a quantum computer can decode anything very quickly. So, a code that would take an ordinary computer, 30 years to crack, a quantum computer could crack in 5 minutes. And when I read this, I thought, oh my God, we're stuffed. We're stuffed. Because our entire civilization is controlled by electronic codes, isn't it? Our satellite system, our defenses, our electrical system, our water supply system, the telephone system, the internet, absolutely everything is controlled by electronic codes. And it occurred to me that someone who understood quantum cryptography could close down our civilizations overnight and send us back into the Middle Ages. And the easiest and quickest way to do this would be to shut down the grid. And we know already that there have been lots of sabotage attempts from the Russians and the Chinese particularly, that these kind of exploratory attempts to see what recently in the USA, an entire water supply system was closed down. People who have quantum computers will be able to do this very easily. So I have a character who is a quantum cryptographer, and he thinks if I know how to do this, other people know how to do it. And so he buys a ruined house in a very remote part of the West Country in England, and where he wants to rebuild it, and he wants his family and his friends to be able to live there in case anything does happen. And the story is really about him transforming from, you know, somebody who's hunched over a computer into somebody who knows how to hunt and skin rabbits. You know, he has a sort of hero's journey. But, you know, having said all that, the book is actually about all the different kinds of love. Ever since my first 3 books, I was sort of obsessed by violence, which was a surprise to me. I didn't know that before I wrote them. But after 3 rather violent novels, I got fed up with it, and I realized that I was actually interested in the different kinds of love. So, for example, the love between parent and child, between husband and wife, between young lovers, between siblings. And because I always have animals in my books, also the love between people and animals. So the book is actually largely about relationships. It's not actually about science fiction. It's not really about quantum cryptography. It's about all these different relationships and how they evolve. Does that make sense? But it's set in a part of the UK called Cornwall in the West Country, which is in some places still very wild and uninhabited. And we used to go there when I was a child on our family holidays. So it has a little place in my heart.
Okay, thank you.